The rattling sound of a wagon wheel hitting a rock jolted Rebecca Turner awake as the stagecoach rumbled across the arid landscape of northern Arizona Territory. It was the summer of 1885, and the relentless heat had turned the normally pleasant journey into a grueling ordeal. The dark circles under Rebecca's eyes betrayed the exhaustion of traveling for days from Philadelphia to this wild frontier. Her once pristine blue traveling dress now bore the dust and wrinkles of the journey, but nothing could dim the determination in her eyes. "Not much farther to Holbrook now, madam," the driver called down. "Just another hour, weather permitting." Rebecca nodded gratefully, dabbing her handkerchief against her perspiring forehead. At 22, she had left behind everything familiar: her parents' grand home, her position as a schoolteacher, and the comfortable predictability of Philadelphia society, all to accept a teaching position in the Arizona Territory. The letter offering her the position had promised adventure and purpose, two things sorely lacking in her carefully arranged life back east. "Lord have mercy," muttered the elderly woman beside her, fanning herself vigorously. "I've lived in these parts 30 years and never known a summer this fierce. You picked a mighty trying time to arrive, Miss Turner." Rebecca managed a smile. "I suppose that means things can only improve from here." The woman chuckled. "I like your spirit, girl. You'll need it out here." As the stagecoach crested a hill, Rebecca caught her first glimpse of Holbrook in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings shimmering in the heat along the banks of the Little Colorado River. The sight simultaneously thrilled and terrified her. This dusty frontier town would be her home now, so far from the refined streets of Philadelphia. The stagecoach pulled into town with a cacophony of creaking wheels and whinnying horses, drawing curious glances from the locals. Rebecca stepped down tentatively, her legs wobbly after so many hours confined to the small space. The town's main street was alive with activity: cowboys lounging outside the saloon, merchants arranging goods on their porches, and women in calico dresses hurrying about their errands. "Miss Turner." A portly man in a worn suit approached her. "I'm Walter Jameson, president of the town council. We've been expecting you." Rebecca straightened her back, determined to make a good impression. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Jameson. Thank you for the opportunity to teach in your community. We're mighty pleased to have a proper educated lady from the East taking charge of our schoolhouse," he said, gesturing toward her trunks. "I've arranged for your things to be taken to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. She's got a room prepared for you." As they walked through town, Rebecca tried to absorb every detail of her new home. Holbrook was raw and unrefined compared to Philadelphia, yet there was an energy here that stirred something in her. The buildings were primarily wooden structures, some freshly painted, others weathered by the harsh elements. The scent of sage and dust hung in the air, occasionally punctuated by the smell of cooking from the hotel restaurant. "The schoolhouse is just there," Mr. Jameson pointed to a modest building at the edge of town. "Classes begin next week, which should give you time to settle in and prepare." Rebecca nodded, her mind already racing with plans for her students. "How many children will I be teaching?" 28 at last count, ages 6 to 16. "Some ride in from ranches miles away," he explained. "They're good children mostly, though some of the boys can be a bit wild. They arrived at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a small porch adorned with potted plants, a valiant attempt at civilization in the frontier town. Mrs. Henderson was a thin woman with kind eyes who welcomed Rebecca warmly. "Your room's upstairs, Miss Turner. It's small but comfortable. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6. There's a washroom down the hall that the ladies share." The The room was indeed small, just enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, a small desk, and her trunk. But the window overlooked the distant mountains, and for a moment, Rebecca stood transfixed by their majesty. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it despite the stark contrast to her spacious bedroom back home. This room represented her independence, her adventure. That evening at dinner, she met the other boarders' two elderly sisters who ran the town's millinery shop, a young male clerk from the mercantile and a widow who worked as the telegraph operator. They peppered her with questions about Philadelphia and seemed impressed by her education. "What brings a refined lady like yourself all the way out here?" asked Mrs. Peterson, the widow. Rebecca considered her answer carefully. "I wanted to make a difference somewhere I was truly needed." She didn't mention her broken engagement to Thomas Worthington Roman III, whose family had deemed her too headstrong for their son. She didn't speak of her parents' disappointment or her growing sense that she was meant for something more than being an ornament in someone's parlor. Those were pieces of herself she wasn't ready to share. The next morning, Rebecca rose early to explore her new town properly. The schoolhouse was her first destination, a simple one-room building with rows of wooden desks and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. The previous teacher had left a collection of books and slates, along with attendance records that Rebecca studied carefully, committing her future students' names to memory. As she stepped outside, the heat already building despite the early hour, she noticed a group of riders approaching town. They moved with the easy confidence of men who'd spent their lives on horseback, dust rising in their wake. Rebecca found herself watching one rider in particular, tall and broad-shouldered. He sat his horse with a natural grace that caught her attention. Rather than heading into town, Rebecca decided to walk along the riverbank. The little Colorado River wasn't grand like the rivers back east, but it was a welcome strip of green in the otherwise brown landscape. She found a path that led down to the water's edge and followed it, enjoying the relative coolness near the water. She walked for nearly an hour, her mind full of plans for her classroom, until she realized she had ventured quite far from town. Turning back, she suddenly felt light-headed. The heat was more intense than she'd realized, and she'd foolishly forgotten to bring water. Black spots danced before her eyes as she tried to quicken her pace back toward town. The world began to tilt around her. Rebecca reached for a nearby tree to steady herself, but her legs gave way beneath her. As consciousness slipped away, her last thought was of how foolish she'd been to underestimate the Arizona sun. When Rebecca began to regain her senses, she felt strong arms around her and heard a deep voice murmuring, "Breathe. Just breathe now." Her eyes fluttered open to find herself cradled against a broad chest, her face mere inches from a stranger's concerned gaze. Startled, she tried to sit up. "Easy there," the man cautioned, helping her to sit. "You fainted. Heat gets to everyone eventually out here." Rebecca's vision cleared enough to take in her rescuer, the same rider she'd noticed earlier. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps no more than 25 or 26. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Dark hair fell across his forehead beneath his worn Stetson. "I'm so embarrassed," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How careless of me," he chuckled, the sound warm and reassuring. "No need for embarrassment. The desert has a way of humbling even the most prepared." He offered her a canteen. "Small sips now." Rebecca obeyed, the water tasting sweeter than anything she could remember. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." "Hunter Hayes," he replied, settling back on his heels. "And you would be the new schoolteacher everyone's been talking about." She nodded, noticing for the first time the badge pinned to his vest. "You're the sheriff." Deputy, he corrected. Sheriff Lawson's laid up with a broken leg. I'm filling in. He glanced at the sun's position. Think you can stand? We should get you back to town before this heat gets any worse. With his help, Rebecca rose to her feet, though she swayed slightly. Hunter Hayes kept a steadying hand at her elbow. My horse is just up the bank, he said. I was patrolling the river road when I spotted you go down. Rebecca eyed the tall horse nervously. I've never actually ridden before. Hunter's eyebrows rose in surprise. Never. Well, there's a first time for everything in the West, Miss Turner. Stardust here is gentle as they come. Before she could protest further, he'd lifted her onto the horse and swung up behind her. One strong arm wrapped around her waist to keep her secure as he took the reins with his free hand. Hold onto the saddle horn, he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. The ride back to town was both terrifying and exhilarating. Rebecca was acutely aware of the strength in the arm that held her, the solid chest at her back. It was scandalously improper by Philadelphia standards, but she found herself caring less than she should have. As they rode, Hunter pointed out landmarks and plants, naming each cactus and shrub with the familiarity of someone who'd grown up among them. Have you lived in Holbrook long? She asked, trying to distract herself from their proximity. Born and raised on a ranch about 20 miles from here, he replied. Left for a few years' road with the cavalry scouting for renegade Apaches, but came back when my father passed. My brother runs the ranch now, and I took on deputy work. I'm sorry about your father, Rebecca said softly. Thank you, it's been 3 years now. His voice carried a note of resigned acceptance. What about you? What brings a city girl all the way to Holbrook? Rebecca hesitated, then decided on honesty. A desire for adventure, I suppose, and independence. She felt rather than heard his chuckle. Well, you've certainly found the right place for both. As they approached town, Rebecca became increasingly conscious of the spectacle they must present the new schoolteacher riding double with the deputy. Sure enough, heads turned as they made their way down the main street. Perhaps you should let me down before we reach the boarding house, she suggested anxiously. I wouldn't want to cause gossip. Hunter reined the horse to a stop at the edge of town. Miss Turner, one thing you'll learn about frontier towns' gossip is as essential as water. Better to give them something worth talking about. Despite his teasing words, he helped her down discreetly, ensuring she was steady on her feet before leading her and the horse the rest of the way on foot. At the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson rushed out, clucking with concern. Deputy Hayes. What's happened? Nothing serious, Mrs. Henderson. Miss Turner had a bit too much sun during her walk. Might want to keep her in the shade and make sure she drinks plenty of water today. The landlady took Rebecca's arm, guiding her toward the house. You Eastern folks never respect the desert heat. Come along, dear. A cool cloth and some lemonade will set you right. Rebecca turned back to thank her rescuer, only to find him tipping his hat to her with a smile that made her heart flutter inappropriately. Welcome to Holbrook, Miss Turner, he said. I reckon life here will never be dull with you around. As Mrs. Henderson led her inside, Rebecca couldn't help glancing back one more time to watch Deputy Hayes swing easily into his saddle and ride away. For all her preparation and dreams of adventure, nothing had prepared her for the way her pulse quickened at the memory of being held in those strong arms, hearing that deep voice urging her to breathe. The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Rebecca arranged her classroom, reviewed her teaching materials, and slowly acclimatized to the desert heat, always careful to carry water and wear her wide-brimmed hat when venturing outdoors. She hadn't seen Hunter Hayes since her embarrassing episode, though she found herself looking for him whenever she walked through town. 3 days before classes were to begin, Rebecca was working late in the schoolhouse, writing out lessons on the blackboard when the door creaked open. She turned, startled, to find Hunter standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading daylight. "Deputy Hayes," she said, automatically smoothing her skirts. "Good evening, Miss Turner." He stepped inside, removing his hat. "Thought I'd check how you're settling in." "No more fainting spells, I hope." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "None whatsoever. I've become quite vigilant about staying hydrated." He nodded, his eyes moving around the classroom. "Place looks different, brighter somehow." She'd spent hours scrubbing the floors and windows, arranging wildflowers in jars on the windowsills, and hanging colorful maps on the walls. "I wanted it to be welcoming," she explained. "Some of these children travel miles for their education. They deserve a pleasant environment." Hunter moved closer, examining the books she'd arranged on shelves. "We never had maps or story books when I was in school here. Just McGuffey readers and a stern schoolmaster with a willow switch." "You attended this school?" Rebecca asked, trying to picture him as a boy. "For a few years. My mother insisted, even when my father said a rancher's son only needed to know how to count cattle and sign his name." A smile touched his lips at the memory. "She won that argument." Rebecca leaned against her desk, curious. "And did you enjoy learning?" "More than I let on to the other boys," he admitted. "Especially rating. Used to sneak books home and read by lantern light after chores." The image of a young Hunter reading secretly at night touched something in Rebecca's heart. She'd been fortunate to grow up surrounded by books, encouraged to learn. "What brings you by the school this evening, Deputy?" she asked, suddenly aware they were alone in the dimming light. He seemed to hesitate before reaching into his pocket. "Found this at Marshall's store and thought it might be useful." He extended his hand, revealing a small brass bell. "For calling your students to order." Rebecca accepted the gift, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, thank you." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Rebecca felt that same inexplicable flutter in her chest. Hunter cleared his throat and stepped back, replacing his hat. "I should let you finish up. It's getting dark, and I wouldn't want you walking back alone." He gestured toward the window. "Would you allow me to escort you to your boarding house when you're ready?" Rebecca nodded, oddly breathless. "That would be very kind. I'll just be a few more minutes." As she gathered her papers, she was conscious of Hunter moving around the classroom, examining her handiwork with apparent interest. There was something both comforting and unsettling about his presence, a tension she couldn't quite name. The walk back to Mrs. Henderson's was filled with easy conversation. Hunter pointed out constellations appearing in the darkening sky, naming them in both English and Apache terms he'd learned during his scouting days. "The stars seem closer here," Rebecca observed, her head tilted back to take in the vast expanse above them. "In Philadelphia, the buildings and street lamps obscure much of the night sky." "That's one thing about the West," Hunter replied. "Makes a person feel small under all that open sky, but somehow more alive at the same time." Rebecca glanced at him, struck by the unexpected poetry in his words. "Precisely. That's exactly how I've felt since arriving, but couldn't articulate." They reached the boarding house too quickly for Rebecca's liking. On the porch, she turned to thank him. "Will you be at the town social on Saturday?" Hunter asked suddenly. "It's tradition to welcome new folks properly before school starts. Mr. Jameson mentioned it." "I plan to attend," she replied, inexplicably pleased that he'd asked. "Good." He seemed about to say more, then simply tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Turner." "Good night, Deputy Hayes." Rebecca watched him walk away, his stride long and confident in the moonlight. She couldn't deny the attraction she felt toward him, something entirely different from the polite interest she'd felt toward suitors in Philadelphia. Hunter Hayes was unlike any man she'd known, and that both thrilled and frightened her. Saturday evening arrived with a sense of anticipation. The town hall had been transformed with lanterns and bunting, tables laden with food prepared by the women of Holbrook. Rebecca wore her best dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd arranged in a softer style than her usual severe schoolteacher's bun. Mrs. Henderson appraised her with knowing eyes as they walked to the social together. "You look lovely, dear. I suspect a certain deputy won't be able to take his eyes off you." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Henderson, please. Deputy Hayes simply assisted me when I was unwell." "There's nothing more to it," the older woman chuckled. "If you say so, my dear, but I've been watching men and women circle each other for 50 years, and I know that look." The hall was already crowded when they arrived. Rebecca was introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Holbrook and the surrounding ranches. She met parents of her future students, local businessmen, and ranchers' wives who promised to bring baked goods for school events. She was deep in conversation with the doctor's wife when she felt a presence at her elbow. Turning, she found Hunter standing there in a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair slicked back. He looked handsome in a way that made her momentarily forget what she'd been saying. "Miss Turner," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look beautiful tonight." "Thank you, Deputy," she managed, aware of the doctor's wife's interested gaze. "You clean up rather well yourself." The small band in the corner struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving to the cleared area for dancing. Hunter extended his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance?" Rebecca hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved hand in his. "I should warn you, I'm accustomed to more formal dances than I suspect are common here." His smile was warm. "Just follow my lead." The dance was indeed unlike the carefully choreographed waltzes of Philadelphia ballrooms. This was faster, with more movement and less formality. Hunter's hand at her waist guided her through the steps, his eyes never leaving hers. Rebecca found herself laughing as she occasionally stumbled, her earlier concerns about propriety fading in the joy of the moment. When the music slowed, Hunter drew her slightly closer, still respectable, but intimate enough that she could detect the scent of soap and something uniquely him. "You're a natural," he said softly. "You're a good teacher," she replied. Something changed in his expression, a seriousness replacing his earlier levity. "Rebecca," he said, using her given name for the first time. Whatever he intended to say was interrupted by a commotion at the door. A young ranch hand burst in, his face flushed with exertion. "Deputy Hayes," he called. "There's trouble at the Silver Dollar. Morgan brothers are tearing the place apart." Hunter's posture immediately shifted, the lawman replacing the dance partner. He turned apologetically to Rebecca. "I'm sorry, I have to go." She nodded her understanding. "Of course, please be careful." His expression softened momentarily. "Save another dance for me." "I will," she promised. Rebecca watched him stride quickly from the hall, hand already moving to the gun at his hip. The contrast between the gentle man who danced with her and the deputy heading toward danger left her feeling oddly off balance. "Don't you worry about Hunter," said a voice beside her. Rebecca turned to find an older man observing her with kind eyes. "I'm James Hayes, Hunter's uncle. That boy's been handling the Morgan brothers since they were all knee-high troublemakers." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hayes," Rebecca said, grateful for the distraction from her concerns. "Your nephew has been very kind in helping me adjust to Holbrook." James Hayes chuckled. "I'll bet he has. Haven't seen him this interested in town duties since he took the deputy badge." He offered his arm. "While we wait for him to return, Perhaps you'll allow an old rancher to show you how we really dance out west." Rebecca spent the next hour being introduced to more of Hunter's family cousins. An aunt, his brother's wife, each welcoming her with a warmth that suggested they'd already formed certain assumptions about her relationship with Hunter. She should have been scandalized by their presumption, but instead found herself oddly pleased. The moon was high when Hunter finally returned, a small cut above his eye the only evidence of whatever confrontation had occurred at the saloon. His eyes sought Rebecca immediately, and the relief on his face when he spotted her talking with his family was unmistakable. "Everything settled?" his uncle asked as Hunter joined them. "The Morgans are sleeping it off in the jail," Hunter confirmed, his eyes still on Rebecca. "Sheriff Lawson can decide what to do with them tomorrow." He turned to Rebecca. "I believe you promised me another dance." The band was playing a slower tune now, and fewer couples remained on the floor. As Hunter led her into the dance, Rebecca noticed the cut on his brow. "You're hurt," she said, resisting the urge to touch it. "It's nothing," he assured her. "Occupational hazard." They moved together with more ease now, Rebecca having learned the rhythm of the Western dances. The hour was late, propriety somewhat relaxed, and Hunter held her closer than before. "Your family is lovely," Rebecca said. "They've made me feel very welcome." Hunter smiled. "They like you. My Aunt Mary already asked if you'd be joining us for Sunday dinner tomorrow." Rebecca's eyes widened. "She invited me to dinner." "Actually," Hunter looked slightly abashed, "I was hoping to invite you myself, but she beat me to it. Our ranch is about an hour's ride from town. I'd come fetch you around noon if you'd like to come." The invitation held implications that Rebecca couldn't ignore. In Philadelphia, being invited to a man's family home signaled serious intentions. Was it the same here? Or was this simply Western hospitality? "I'd be delighted," she heard herself saying, pushing aside her uncertainty. Something like relief crossed Hunter's face. "Good, that's good." As the music ended, neither moved immediately to separate. For a breathless moment, Rebecca thought he might kiss her, right there in the town hall with everyone watching. Instead, he stepped back respectfully, though his eyes conveyed emotions that made her pulse quicken. "I should see you home," he said, his voice lower than before. "It's late." The walk to her boarding house seemed both endless and too brief. They moved slowly through the quiet streets, their conversation sporadic but comfortable. At her door, Rebecca turned to face him. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said, suddenly shy, "and for the dance lessons." Hunter's smile was gentle. "Thank you for saving that dance." He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand, raising it slowly to his lips in a gesture more refined than she would have expected from a frontier lawman. "Good night, Rebecca." The touch of his lips against her gloved hand sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the night air. "Good night, Hunter." Inside her room, Rebecca sat on the edge of her bed, her mind racing. In just a week, her carefully planned new life in Hallbrook had veered in an unexpected direction. Tomorrow, she would visit Hunter's family ranch. The day after, she would meet her students for the first time. Nothing about this frontier town was turning out as she'd anticipated, and yet she couldn't remember ever feeling so alive. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the desert air already warming as Rebecca dressed carefully for her visit to the Hayes Ranch. She chose a practical riding skirt and jacket in deep blue, with a white blouse that was feminine without being impractical for a ranch visit. Mrs. Henderson had helped her arrange her hair in a style that would remain neat under a hat during the ride. "Deputy Hayes is a good man," the landlady said as she pinned the last strand in place. "His mother was a fine woman from Boston originally, married his father and moved west when the territory was still wild. She brought civilization with her, they say." Rebecca absorbed this information eagerly. Do you know how she died? Influenza, about 8 years ago. Left those boys and their father heartbroken. The ranch was never quite the same after. Mrs. Henderson stood back to admire her handiwork. There, you look lovely, practical but pretty too. At precisely noon, Rebecca heard hoofbeats outside. From her window, she saw Hunter arriving with a second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a side saddle. "I thought you might prefer this to riding double all the way to the ranch," he explained when she met him outside. "Daisy here is well-mannered and patient with new riders." Rebecca eyed the horse with trepidation. "I'm not sure I remember everything you taught me about mounting." Hunter's smile was reassuring. "That's what I'm here for." With his guidance and support, Rebecca found herself properly settled in the saddle. The sensation was strange but not unpleasant. Hunter adjusted her stirrup and handed her the reins, his hands lingering briefly on hers. "Just follow my lead and tell me if you need to rest," he instructed. "It's not a difficult ride, but it's your first." They set out at a gentle pace, Hunter keeping Stardust close beside Daisy. As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up around them, vast stretches of scrubland interspersed with mesas and distant mountains. The beauty of it nearly took Rebecca's breath away. "It's magnificent," she said, gazing at the panorama. "So different from the East, but beautiful in its own way." Hunter nodded, pleased by her reaction. Most Easterners only see the harshness at first. Takes a special eye to appreciate the beauty here. As they rode, Hunter pointed out landmarks and shared stories of growing up in the territory. He spoke of childhood adventures with his brother, of learning to track from Apache scouts, of cattle drives and the changing seasons in the desert. Rebecca listened, enthralled by this glimpse into a life so different from her own. "What about you?" Hunter asked eventually. "You've mentioned Philadelphia, but little else about your life there." Rebecca considered how much to share. "My father is a banker. My mother organizes charity functions and garden parties. I taught at a girls' school and was expected to make an advantageous marriage." "And yet you came to Holbrook," Hunter observed. "That's quite a change." She smiled ruefully. "I was engaged briefly. To a man my parents approved of, from an old family, well-connected, suitable in every way." "But," Hunter prompted gently. "But I realized I was agreeing to a life where my highest aspiration would be to organize the same garden parties as my mother, to live within the same narrow confines of society." Rebecca's voice strengthened as she continued. "I wanted more. I wanted to make a difference, to experience life beyond Philadelphia drawing rooms." Hunter was quiet for a moment. "And your fiancé didn't understand this desire." Thomas wanted a wife who would enhance his social position, not one with ambitions of her own. Rebecca shook her head at the memory. "When I expressed interest in teaching in the West, he was appalled, said no wife of his would live among savages and outlaws." Hunter's expression darkened slightly. "We're a bit more civilized than that." "I know that now," Rebecca assured him. "But Thomas couldn't see beyond his prejudices. So I returned his ring and accepted the teaching position. My parents were devastated, of course. They're convinced I'll return to Philadelphia once I've gotten this adventure out of my system." "And will you?" Hunter asked, his tone carefully neutral. Rebecca considered the question seriously. "A month ago I might have said yes. Now—" She looked around at the wild beauty surrounding them. "Now I'm not so certain. There's something about this place that speaks to me." Hunter's smile returned. "The desert gets in your blood. My mother used to say she came for love but stayed because the land claimed her heart." They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in thought. As they crested a gentle rise, Hunter pointed ahead. "There it is, the Lazy H." The Hayes Ranch spread out before them, a collection of well-maintained buildings nestled in a shallow valley. A two-story ranch house stood as the centerpiece, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a small creek wound through the property, feeding what appeared to be a modestly successful orchard. "It's lovely," Rebecca said sincerely. Pride was evident in Hunter's voice as he replied, "My father built most of it with his own hands. Started with just a one-room cabin and a dream." As they approached, Rebecca saw people emerging from the main house, a tall man who strongly resembled Hunter, a pretty woman holding a small child, and the uncle she'd met at the social. "My brother Henry and his wife Sarah," Hunter explained. "And their son, little James." They dismounted in the yard, Hunter lifting Rebecca from the saddle with strong, sure hands. The brief moment when she slid down against him, his hands at her waist, sent that now familiar flutter through her chest. Henry Hayes approached with a wide smile that matched his brother's. "So you're the schoolteacher who's got my little brother riding into town every day on deputy business," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "Henry," Hunter warned, but his brother just laughed. Sarah Hayes stepped forward with the toddler on her hip. "Ignore my husband, Miss Turner. He thinks he's funny." She smiled warmly. "We're so glad you could join us today." The welcome Rebecca received from the Hayes family was overwhelming in its sincerity. They ushered her into a home that was surprisingly refined for a frontier ranch. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the curtains and rugs showing a woman's touch. Photographs and mementos decorated the walls, telling the story of generations. Hunter's mother insisted on bringing civilization with her, Sarah explained as she showed Rebecca around. "This piano came by wagon all the way from St. Louis. She taught both boys to play, though Hunter was the only one with any talent for it." Rebecca glanced at Hunter in surprise. "You play the piano?" He looked slightly embarrassed. "Not in years." "That's not true," his Aunt Mary countered, appearing from the kitchen. "I've heard you playing when you think everyone's asleep." She turned to Rebecca. "He has his mother's gift for music." Dinner was served at a long table in the dining room, a feast of roast beef, vegetables from the garden, and fresh baked bread. The conversation flowed easily, with stories and laughter. Rebecca found herself drawn into the family dynamic, answering questions about the East and sharing her plans for the school. "Hunter tells us you fainted by the river your first week in town," Henry said with a teasing glance at his brother. "And he had to rescue you like a knight in dusty armor." Rebecca blushed. "It wasn't my finest moment. I underestimated how quickly the heat could affect me." "Lucky for you my brother was patrolling that area," Henry continued. "Though come to think of it, that wasn't his usual route." Hunter cleared his throat. "I was tracking those strays from the Peterson place." "Of course you were," Henry said with a knowing smile that made Rebecca wonder if Hunter's presence on that riverbank had been entirely coincidental. After dinner, Hunter suggested showing Rebecca the rest of the ranch. As they walked together through the orchard, the late afternoon sun filtering through the leaves, Rebecca felt a peace she hadn't expected to find in this wild territory. "Your family is wonderful," she said. "The way they've welcomed me." Hunter smiled. "They can see what I see." "And what's that?" Rebecca asked, her heart beating faster. He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Someone special. Someone who doesn't just see the hardships of frontier life but appreciates its beauty." He hesitated, then continued more softly. "Someone I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I found her by the riverbank." Rebecca's breath caught. "Hunter." "I know it's fast," he said quickly. "We've barely known each other a week, but out here life moves differently. When something valuable crosses your path, you recognize it." Before Rebecca could respond, a call came from the house. Hunter's uncle was waving to them. "We should start back to town before dark," Hunter said reluctantly. "The trail can be treacherous at night." The ride back to Holbrook was quieter, both of them reflecting on the day and the words spoken in the orchard. As they approached town, Hunter broke the silence. "I'd like to court you properly, Rebecca, if you're amenable." The formal request, so unexpected from this rugged deputy, touched Rebecca deeply. "I would like that very much." His smile in the fading light made her glad she'd come to this wild place where life moved faster and hearts spoke more honestly than in the drawing rooms of Philadelphia. The following weeks fell into a pattern that brought Rebecca more happiness than she'd ever expected to find in Holbrook. Her days were filled with teaching challenging but rewarding work with children, eager to learn despite the hardships of frontier life. Her evenings often included Hunter, who would escort her on walks through town, bring her books from his mother's collection, or simply sit with her on the boarding house porch, talking until Mrs. Henderson pointedly turned down the lamps. The town observed their courtship with approving eyes. Rebecca found herself welcomed not just as the new schoolteacher, but as Deputy Hayes's girl, a designation that should have offended her independent nature, but somehow didn't. One crisp October evening, Hunter arrived at the boarding house with his horse and a picnic basket. "The weather's perfect," he explained, "and there's a place by the river I'd like to show you." Rebecca had become a competent rider under Hunter's patient instruction. They rode together along the river, following it upstream beyond where she had walked that fateful day. The terrain grew more dramatic, with rock formations rising on either side of the water. Hunter led her to a small clearing surrounded by cottonwood trees, their leaves golden in the autumn light. A natural pool had formed where the river widened, the water clear and still. "My mother used to bring us here when we were boys," Hunter explained as he spread a blanket on the ground. "She called it her sanctuary." They ate the simple meal Sarah had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie while watching the play of light on the water. When they finished, Hunter produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly nervous. "I hope you'll accept it." Rebecca unwrapped the package to find a small leather-bound book of poetry, Wordsworth's collected works. Opening it, she saw an inscription inside the cover. "To my beloved Catherine, who found beauty in the wilderness, all my love, Thomas Hayes." "This was your mother's," Rebecca said softly, understanding the significance of the gift. Hunter nodded. "She read to us from it every evening. Said poetry helped civilize the soul, even in uncivilized places." Rebecca traced the inscription with gentle fingers. "I can't accept something so precious." "You can," Hunter insisted. "She would have wanted you to have it." Someone who understands both worlds, the refinement of the East and the beauty of the West. Rebecca looked up at him, seeing the emotion in his eyes. "Thank you. I'll treasure it always." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, Hunter moved closer to her on the blanket. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. "Rebecca," he began, his voice deep and serious, "these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I know it hasn't been long, by Eastern standards at least, but I've never been more certain of anything." Rebecca's heart began to race as she realized where his words were leading. "I love you," Hunter continued, raising her hand to his lips. "Your spirit, your kindness, your courage in coming to this wild place. I want to build a life with you here if you'll have me." Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as emotion overwhelmed her. This wasn't the calculated proposal she'd received from Thomas in Philadelphia, surrounded by both their families in her parents' formal parlor. This was raw and honest, spoken from the heart in a beautiful wilderness. "Hunter," she whispered, her voice catching, "I love you too. I never expected to find you when I came west, but now I can't imagine my life without you." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that would have scandalized Philadelphia society, but seemed perfectly right in this moment, in this place. Rebecca responded with equal fervor, her arms around his neck, the poetry book still clutched in one hand. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, a smile in his voice. Rebecca laughed, joy bubbling up from some deep place inside her. "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Hunter Hayes." He reached into his pocket and produced a small ring, a delicate silver band set with a blue stone that caught the last light of day. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "My father gave it to her when they reached Arizona territory. The stone is turquoise, native to this land." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Rebecca looked at it, then at the man beside her, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home. Their wedding took place on Christmas Day, 1885, in the Holbrook Church. The entire town turned out for the event, the small building packed to capacity with ranchers, townspeople, and Rebecca's students, all dressed in their finest clothes despite the winter chill. Rebecca wore a gown of ivory satin that Mrs. Henderson and the ladies of the sewing circle had helped her make, adorned with lace sent by her mother, a peace offering along with the news that her parents would not attend, but wished her happiness. Hunter looked handsome in a new black suit, his usual confidence temporarily replaced by awe as Rebecca walked down the aisle toward him. Sheriff Lawson, recovered from his broken leg, stood as Hunter's best man. Sarah Hayes served as Rebecca's matron of honor, with little James as ring bearer, solemnly carrying the turquoise ring on a small pillow. The celebration afterward filled the town hall, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by every family in Holbrook. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and tears. When Hunter swept Rebecca into the first dance as husband and wife, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "Mrs. Hayes," he murmured as they moved across the floor. "How does it feel?" Rebecca smiled up at him. "Like coming home." They made their home in a small house at the edge of town, close enough for Rebecca to walk to the schoolhouse each day, but with enough land for Hunter to keep horses. The house had belonged to a banker who'd returned east, discouraged by frontier life. With help from Hunter's family, they transformed it into a warm, welcoming space that combined Rebecca's Eastern refinement with Western practicality. Rebecca continued teaching, her classroom growing as more families moved to the area. Hunter remained deputy sheriff, though he also helped his brother with the ranch when needed. Their life together found a rhythm challenging at times, with the hardships of territory life, but rich with love and purpose. In the spring of 1887, their first child was born, a son they named Thomas James Hayes, after both their fathers. Rebecca held her newborn son in the bedroom of their Holbrook home, with Hunter beside her, his face a mixture of pride, joy, and wonder. "He's perfect," Hunter whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with a gentle finger. "Strong like his mother," Rebecca smiled tiredly. "And handsome like his father." As young Thomas grew, so did Holbrook. The railroad brought more settlers, more businesses. Arizona moved toward statehood, bringing changes both welcome and concerning. Through it all, Hunter and Rebecca remained constants in the community, he eventually becoming sheriff when Lawson retired, she expanding the school as the population increased. Their family grew as well. In 1889, they welcomed a daughter, Catherine Mary, named for Hunter's mother. 2 years later, another son joined the family, William Hunter, who from his first day showed the same determined spirit as his parents. Life was not without challenges. The winter of 1890 brought scarlet fever to Holbrook, and young Catherine hovered between life and death for days, Rebecca and Hunter taking turns at her bedside, praying for the medicine sent for from Flagstaff to arrive in time. When the child's fever finally broke, they held each other and wept with relief. There were droughts that threatened the Hayes Ranch, political conflicts as the territory changed, and the everyday hardships of frontier life. But through it all, Hunter and Rebecca faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with time. On their 10th anniversary, Hunter surprised Rebecca by taking her back to the riverbank where they'd first met, the spot where she had fainted, and he had held her close, telling her to breathe. They rode there together in the winter sunshine, their children left in the care of Sarah for the day. "It looks different in winter," Rebecca observed as they dismounted, "yet exactly the same." Hunter took her hand, leading her to the exact spot. "I knew, even then when I found you here, something told me my life had just changed forever." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "I thought you were the most handsome man I'd ever seen, even as I was mortified by the circumstances." He laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Best patrol I ever rode." They stood together on the riverbank, reflecting on the decade they'd shared, the joys and sorrows, the growth of their family, the community they'd helped build. Rebecca thought of the young woman who had fainted there, overwhelmed by heat and the newness of frontier life, and marveled at how much had changed. "Any regrets?" Hunter asked softly. "About leaving Philadelphia, about choosing this life?" Rebecca looked up at him, at the face she had loved through 10 years of marriage, now with lines of experience etched around the eyes and mouth, but still as handsome as the day he'd found her. "Not one," she said truthfully. "Every choice that brought me here was the right one." He kissed her then, with the same passion as when they'd been newly in love, yet deepened by years of shared life. "Come on," he said when they parted. "I have one more surprise." He led her to a clearing not far from the riverbank, where to her astonishment a small cabin stood, new construction, with smoke rising from its chimney. "What is this?" Rebecca asked, confused. Hunter smiled proudly. "Our retreat. Henry and I built it over the last few months. A place just for us, away from town and responsibilities, where we can come when we need solitude." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bedroom visible through an open door. Books lined one wall, her favorite volumes from their home in town. "Hunter, it's wonderful," she breathed, taking it all in. "But when would we use it?" He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Whenever we need to remember how it all began. Whenever the sheriff and the schoolteacher need to be just Hunter and Rebecca again." Rebecca turned in his arms, overcome with emotion. "How did I get so fortunate to find you in this vast wilderness?" "I'm the fortunate one," Hunter corrected. "You fainted by the riverbank, and my whole world changed for the better." They spent the night in their new cabin, rekindling the romance that daily responsibilities sometimes pushed aside. As they lay together in the quiet darkness, listening to the river's distant murmur, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the confines of Philadelphia society to the freedom of the Arizona territory, from a young woman seeking adventure to a wife and mother deeply rooted in the community she'd helped build. "What are you thinking?" Hunter asked, his voice low in the darkness. Rebecca smiled, nestling closer to him. "I was thinking about breathing, how you told me to breathe that day by the river, and how ever since you've given me the space and support to truly breathe, to become who I was meant to be." Hunter's arms tightened around her. "And you've taught me to see the beauty in things I took for granted. The land, the stars, our children. Everything is more vivid with you beside me." As they drifted toward sleep, Rebecca thought of the letter she'd received just days ago from her mother, announcing that she and Rebecca's father would finally make the journey west to visit in the spring to meet the grandchildren they knew only through photographs and letters. It would be a bridging of her two worlds, the final reconciliation of her past and present. In the years that followed, the cabin by the river became their special retreat, a place where Hunter and Rebecca could step away from their responsibilities and reconnect with each other. As their children grew, they sometimes brought them there too, teaching them to fish in the river and identify the desert plants, passing on both Rebecca's love of learning and Hunter's deep connection to the land. Thomas, their eldest, followed in his father's footsteps, eventually becoming deputy sheriff himself before moving to Flagstaff to join the territorial law enforcement. Catherine, with her mother's intelligence and determination, attended college in California, the first woman from Holbrook to pursue higher education, before returning to teach alongside Rebecca. Young William surprised them all by showing a talent for business, eventually taking over the management of the Hayes Ranch when his Uncle Henry retired. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, Hunter and Rebecca watched the celebrations in Holbrook with pride, knowing they had contributed to building the community that would be part of this new chapter in history. Hunter, his dark hair now streaked with silver, served on the first town council under state governance. Rebecca, still teaching though now as headmistress of the expanded school, led her students in patriotic songs to mark the occasion. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the last of the fireworks, Rebecca leaned against Hunter's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine this day when you were a boy here?" He shook his head. Arizona was wild territory then. Statehood seemed as distant as the moon. He looked down at her, love evident in his gaze despite the passing years. "But then, I never imagined you either, and here you've been beside me for nearly 3 decades." Rebecca smiled, thinking of all they had witnessed together, the coming of more railroads, automobiles beginning to replace horses on Holbrook streets, electricity illuminating homes that once relied on lanterns and candles. The frontier town she had arrived in had grown and changed, as had they. "We've been fortunate," she said softly, "to see so much change yet keep what matters most." Hunter took her hand, his thumb brushing over the turquoise ring she still wore every day. "And what matters most, Mrs. Hayes? This," she said simply. "You and me, our family, the life we built here." As the last fireworks faded from the sky, Hunter leaned down to kiss his wife of 27 years, a kiss that held the memory of that first embrace by the riverbank, when a young deputy had cradled a fainting schoolteacher and whispered, "Breathe." In that moment, with the sounds of celebration still echoing through the now settled town of Holbrook, Rebecca knew that coming west had been more than an adventure or an escape from the confines of Philadelphia society. It had been a journey to her true self, to the life and love that had been waiting for her on the wild frontier. With Hunter beside her, she had learned to breathe deeply of all life offered, its joys and sorrows, its challenges and rewards, and in the breathing, she had found home.